All right, here we are again. This is gonna be exciting. Let's turn down the music and get this going. All right, everybody. Well, welcome again. This is Jason Sheftel. I'm here to talk about the world and what's going on. I'm a consultant for real estate, geopolitics, transportation, all that kind of fun stuff. I'm also an author, podcaster, and here, live streamer and video content producer. So we're going to get right into it today. For people who don't know, I am talking about industry all week. We're going to talk about industry. That means manufacturing, that means defense, that means logistics, that means construction, that means real estate, that means everything, right? And we're going to go historical. We're going to try and figure out what's going on because there's huge changes all around us, and we got to figure out what to make of them. So let's get right into it. All around the world, industry is cracking. So we could go to Europe and talk about what's going on there. We could talk about the ports in China that are shutting down. It's really just something you're seeing everywhere except the United States, which is interesting because the old story has been everything's fleeing, manufacturing is leaving the United States, it's going to China, etc., etc. Now the story is changing, and everybody listening to this channel is going to know where things are actually moving. That is what's so exciting. Everyone here is talking about where things are really going. We're learning about the way the world really works, whether you just want to know more, you want that sense of actually traveling across the country, across the world, through time, through space, seeing the different phases of history, traveling the different landscapes of the world, or if you're looking for information to improve your investment decisions, your business outcomes, we get all that here. And so where are we going to look today? Well, the place where industry is breaking down more than anywhere else is Europe. This very tense collection of all sorts of countries that don't get along and have been at each other's throats for about 500 years, and actually much longer, but they weren't really countries at that point. It's a bit different. Still, that is the place. Europe is the canary in the coal mine for the end of a lot of industry and a new phase of industrialization and really the industrial world. And among all these countries, one is facing some really unique challenges that we're going to talk about today. And that, of course, is the United Kingdom, the godfather of the United States, the sort of old parent. And people, you always got to remember just how far the British have fallen. So here's a quick picture. This is, here, let me also pull this up too, just so you guys can always see me here. Wait, there it is. Okay, so here we have, this is Britain way back in this is 100 years ago. This is the British Empire. This is the greatest this is the greatest empire the world has ever seen. There's no other way to talk about it. There's no other way to describe this. You have a country that used its naval dominance, particularly in the second half, like basically the end of the Napoleonic Wars, particularly the last 3/4 of the 19th century, to just take over every single important part of the world. You see the British in, well, you don't actually see it there, but they're in southern South America. They're at the Rio de la Plata. They're in Hudson. They're everywhere. They're basically in North America. They're in East Africa, South Africa, West Africa, both sides of, they have the Suez Canal, India, Malacca Straits, and it goes on and on and on and on. They were basically competing everywhere in the world with every country to just take it over, right? The only other country or empire that was kind of on that level was probably the Mongols, but it was so different. It was this giant land empire. It was a bunch of horses. It was a different world. It wasn't mercantile in the same way. It was a completely different game. The British really were the peak of the imperial era. They really brought it to its total fruition. And one of the things that happened is that as a result of their crazy conquest and all the money that came in, we got the Industrial Revolution. And these days, everybody looks at the Industrial Revolution as this really bad thing. Let me just show you something really quick. This here is a graph. I think it's from Vice, so shout out to Vice, whoever. This is editorial content, obviously. And let me see if I can pull this down a little bit here. Okay. So, yeah, so check this out. This is what the outcomes humanity has seen during the Industrial Revolution. So basically you're seeing An Lushan Rebellion. For people who don't know what that was a major rebellion in the Tang Dynasty. Basically, cracked the Tang Dynasty in two. That was a long time ago. Okay, yeah. So these are all these moments in history with all of these parameters of life and what makes life good for humans, right? You got life expectancy, you got GDP, you got the percentage of your population not in extreme poverty, energy, how you're capturing energy from the environment, etc. All these things, and you could choose any that you want, really. And the graph would all look like this. Sometime in the middle of the 18th century, the whole world just took off. And it really began in Britain. And it's kind of worth, what I'm going to do, we're going to do a little bit of an educational thing today. Really worth it. Before we dive into modern industry, we've got to give you a sense of where industry and industrialization, all this really began, where it really started. And the place to go is 100% Britain. So let's look at this really quick. What we have here is, okay, so here we have, so here we have the United Kingdom. Boom, and you can see me. Great. So this is the sort of content you guys are going to see a lot more of, and this is really my bread and butter. This is where we're going to really show how the world works. So this is the United Kingdom, this is the British Isles. These are four-ish different groups here. We got Ireland, you got Scotland, you got Wales on the southwest part of England, and you have England, and London, of course, is down here. This is the core of British control, power, authority. It's the ethnic base of the country. It is the ethnic base, the financial base, political. It's kind of the everything of the country, and that's actually really common. For a lot of countries, you basically have the political center, and everything kind of radiates out from there. So quick things here. Notice how up in the north, this is Scotland. Look at how mountainous this is. This is extremely, extremely important. This creates the sort of terrain that is very, very difficult to deal with, right? It's very difficult to impose your cultural, your political, and your economic system on a bunch of mountain men. It doesn't really go down very well. And of course, here you have the Forth, the River Forth, and you have Edinburgh here at the base of it, actually a very, very beautiful city with a remarkable castle. Then you have the River Clyde, and you have Glasgow over here. Very cool, that's sort of the core of Scotland. Then you go down, you have the Midlands down here, River Mersey, Manchester, etc. And then, of course, you have Ireland over here. And the problem with Britain has always been it's very difficult to keep all of these pieces together. The French in particular were very, very, very good at making sure that the Irish were always causing trouble, and the Germans were doing the same thing. It was very easy to constantly keep the British at each other's throats, right? And they didn't even really come together until the beginning of the 1800s. So it's really not as, it's not that, how do you say it? Old a country being one big whole. And one of the problems we're seeing today, or one of the outcomes that we're unfortunately seeing, is that Britain is actually in the process potentially of actually breaking apart, right? There's movements for Scottish independence. Can you see it? Yeah, you guys see it. There's movements for Scottish independence in the north. They've always been a bit, who knows, but it's a possibility. As things break down with the EU, outcomes really change as the demography in the United Kingdom splits differentially. There's huge problems that come up. And of course, Ireland is a constant problem. We don't need to get into it all today, but there's two pieces to it, and it is really, they're not English. So good to note. The transport system, let's go out a little bit. The transport system radiates out of Dublin, kind of proving that it's the core here of Ireland, the sort of core administrative center. And you have something similar in England, although here you do have a few other regions. You have, the Birmingham Midlands there, and then you have the other major population center around Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield in the slightly farther north in northern England. So that is really important. And the Industrial Revolution happened. I'll pull it back for a sec for everybody. The Industrial Revolution happened in England, and it happened for very interesting reasons. It was a relation of coal to power generation, steam, And suddenly you had railroads, coal, steam, all these things building up. You had new manufacturing tools, new mechanical tools. It was all expanding at a rate that nobody had ever seen. This was the marriage of new machines to new energy sources, and this constant iteration and improvement and new development that just exploded human outcomes in the way that I just showed you on that graph. So that is what industry is really about. That's what, when people talk about industry and manufacturing, that's what we have now, is the legacy of this immense outpouring of human practical activity, right? That took in all of the inputs of the Enlightenment with all of its political, moral, religious, literary, aesthetic, all those new values, all those new attitudes, added that to the scientific revolution, put it in people's hands, gave them new tools and technologies, and just amazing things happened. And it really happened in Britain. There's a glory to British history that's really real. You know, they achieved amazing things. But of course, in the last, basically since the end of World War II, this whole thing has collapsed. And you've had this progressive decline in Britain. You had the 1960s sort of mod youth revolt. That's really the lot. And they had a punk revolt too. There was a little bit of a meaner version of that a few decades later. And that was really this last kind of sort of spurts of true energy in England, in Britain. And it's really one of those countries that is facing that exhaustion that we're going to be talking about in broadcast after broadcast. We're seeing it in Russia with these wars. We're seeing it in China as people lie flat. And it's a really important part of the world we have today. But now we're going to focus on one example of the decline of British industry and the total transformation. Let's see if we can get some better lighting here. A little darker. Okay. We'll leave it at that. A little bit more. Oops. Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about. Today we're going to talk about one program that shows, one project that shows how much British industry has declined from its height and what that says about where industry around the world is going, what's really happening, right? Once this story of everything moving to China ends, what is the new story? Where are things really headed? So let's get into it. And the place to start is definitely BAE and its new project, basically the Tempest fighter jet. So in the last couple of years, everyone's been trying to make a new fighter jet, right? Europe has their plan. Continental Europe has a plan with a future combat air system, and there's also another future combat air system in Britain, and it's headed by a company named BAE, and it's called Tempest. And I'll show you some quick marketing materials for Tempest. Although this is also really important, just to show you guys some more stuff about the. Oh wow, there is no. Well, it's still kind of cool, actually. Let's get this on here. Ooh. Doesn't want to move. Anyway, that's not really useful. Anyway, that was just a map of output in Britain since the Industrial Revolution. Basically since like 1270. It just shows how once the Industrial Revolution happened, it just totally transformed life, transformed agriculture, and all those outcomes that we were talking about. And what has happened since has been very different. So let's get into this Tempest fighter jet. This is what it looks like. Boom. Here's some early marketing of this jet. Boom. It looks very high-tech. It looks stealthy. It looks modern. It has cues from planes like the F-22 and from the F-35. And here you have all the things that the government wants it to do. It has a virtual cockpit. It has flexible payloads. It's capable. It's stealthy. It's multimodal. It's all this kind of stuff. And this is what we originally saw. These are kind of classic images. Here, we'll keep this up in the corner for now. That's another marketing image. Notice that is, I believe that is on a, let's see if that's on a aircraft carrier. No, it's on land. So we'll leave that up there. But very important. These are these images of this new plane, which is supposed to be amazing. It's supposed to be a 6th generation fighter, right? The idea, again, 3rd and 4th and 5th, 6th generation fighter is a marketing term, particularly thrown out by Lockheed Martin, but it still really applies because there's real qualitative changes and improvements to a lot of these aircraft when you have a completely new model that comes out decades later. They're really a big improvement. And this Tempest is pitched as the newest, most amazing jet that's ever flown. And one challenge with something like this is that we do have a complete revolution in military, aerospace, combat, doctrine, and aircraft coming around with new autonomous fighters and aircraft. It's really transformative. It's changing the way the U.S. military is thinking about things writ large, because it's envisioning a massive conflict with China where you would need really, really elite and large-scale operations from autonomous aircraft. So that is a whole vision of things where this Tempest aircraft is kind of oddly fits in with it. So there's recently the Farnborough Air Show. That is a big, it's a big aerospace event. And basically, here's some so BAE's out there. BAE is the, wow, I haven't even forgotten what the full name, it's now just called BAE, but its original name was probably British Aerospace and Electronic Systems. Definitely British Aerospace. Yeah, that's BAE. This is the main manufacturer for the Tempest. It's out there talking about all the changes, all the improvements to the Tempest aircraft. And here's some of them. Look, it's just basically showing you how the aircraft is even more sleek. The airframe is even more smooth and beautiful than people were expecting. That's basically the gist of what it is trying to show everybody. And that's all fine and good, but what is really going on here? I was talking about how industry has been declining in Europe and everywhere in the world, and particularly in Britain. So just as a quick example of what I mean by that, here is the manufacturing share of manufacturing value add as a share of GDP in Britain and the United Kingdom, and that's the bottom. It's basically 9%. It's basically been at 9% for over close to 10, 15 years now. And this is true in a lot of other countries. The United States is maybe around 12%, 11, 12, but it's also much, much larger. And the truth of how bad things are deindustrializing in Britain is really just poorly understood. Just to bring it back quickly to our map of the world here. Let me show you again. There was a huge, huge industrial area in the Midlands and then around Manchester and the sort of northern part of England. And this has all been deindustrialized. It's pretty horrific how bad it is. And this is deindustrialization. We're talking like the loss of coal plants. We're talking the loss of some really, really old industry. Again, if you're more of an environmentalist type person, you might see that as good because it is removing some pretty terrible satanic mills from back in the day. But what do you have left, right? So part of the reason we have so much political perturbations in England, and we had Brexit, we had all of that, is because as industry has declined, like in North America, and particularly in the United States, everything is reconsolidated. Everything back, starting in the 80s, as globalization took root and industry started to globalize and move to East Asia, what happened is that finance heavily concentrated in a few places around the world. Britain was lucky enough to have London, which is one of the major financial centers in the world, had a very key role in Europe and former parts of the British Empire, and interfacing with New York. It started to pull in just all of the activity. So you have this hyper-financialization in London that was just contrasted with the total breakdown of everything around it, right? The total degradation of cities like Birmingham, which in a world without useful railroads, useful industry, like Birmingham doesn't exist in a lot of in a lot of worlds. A place like Birmingham doesn't have a good reason to exist. And if there's no industry there and there's nothing to actually do there, and the consumer base is shrinking, it gets pretty grim. It gets very, very, very grim. So there's a lot of dark stories about the social underbelly in Britain that have nothing to do with race, but have to do with deep cleavages and breakdown in the social infrastructure, because there's not really a functional economic base there. And that's what's happening outside of London. And it is not something that meshes well with art problems you already have in Ireland, problems you already have kind of meshing with both Scotland and Ireland, and of course even Wales. So by the way, Wales, look at all these mountains. This is another place that, even though it's really not caused all sorts of problems for Britain for a long time, this is not a place that has easily come together with the United Kingdom. So as problems get worse and as economic dysfunction mounts, I should get rid of this little thing. The problems that Britain's going to face, they're really going to magnify over and over again. And a key area where there should be better and more widespread opportunity should be in the manufacturing sector. It should be, and you can't, right? You have agriculture at the bottom, then you have industry, then you have services. That's sort of the developmental genesis of a lot of countries, and that's also what happened with Britain and the United States and most countries in the sort of globalized era of globalized industry. You move towards services, but with so few people needed in agriculture, right? The labor, the labor efficiency of agriculture has gone crazy. So you have like 2% of your population that does most of what you need or most of what your country can do. If you're fortunate enough to have an actual stable domestic agricultural food supply, that is big. Then you had industry, and then everyone had to go into services. But if you don't have high value services, well, at least if you don't have the skills, it's really difficult to get every segment of the population with different labor profiles, skill sets, and valuable contributions into the economic system to actually have a good role to play, one that actually makes them feel dignified, valued, and part of a greater system. It's really a major challenge, and it's something that has been tearing apart Britain for quite a while. And that brings us back to Tempest. So, and specifically not just Tempest, but this company called BAE. BAE. We're gonna go look at the Wikipedia for BAE because it is so important that everyone just sees what is going on. So let's do this. Boom. BAE. Everybody see this? Yeah. Okay, so BAE is a massive multinational arms, security, and aerospace company, of course, based in London. So it is the largest defense contractor in Europe. It's also the largest defense contractor in Australia, and is one of the biggest in the world. The most important thing here, though, is this, and this is even more true today. The reason I'm talking about industry, and I'm talking about a defense company, is because BAE, and this is true in a lot of countries, to varying degrees, BAE is it is the major remaining British manufacturer. You really have to think about that. Of all the grand companies that Britain has spawned during its heyday, during its amazing run as a industrial state, as one of the great industrial states, the only thing that remains of serious magnitude is this company you've probably never heard of called BAE. And if you go look at random financial websites, they'll just tell you it's not the best defense company in the world, at least if you're just investing in assets, right? If you're just investing in equities, they'd be like, yeah, you probably don't want to get this one, go get some American company because they have a much better profile for a lot of reasons. But that's not the point. The point is that this is what remains of the great British industrial enterprise. It is really, really important to talk about this company. So it has a grand history. There was all sorts. By the way, the Marconi company, that was the original developer of the radio. But you go through this, it does everything. It became basically the grand conglomerate that builds a lot of the submarines, aircraft, ships, and almost everything in Britain, right? So it is the last remaining defense contractor in England that is, really notable. And right, so you look at all the major programs the British are a part of: F-35, Eurofighter Typhoon, new submarine, new aircraft carrier, etc. BAE is involved in all of it. So this is the industrial company of Britain, basically. This is the last one. And here is the kicker. Here is why things are getting so weird. Who's the biggest company? Who do you think is the biggest customer of BAE? Who do you think? The Pentagon. That's right. BAE is actually becoming functionally an American company. And it's easier to do this if you're an Anglo company like BAE in the first place. And it just started picking up more and more contracts. And the truth is, it is slyly becoming American. It's becoming American because there is no great prospect for BAE as a purely British or even a European company. Look at all the problems in Europe. Right now, there is two competing future combat aircraft systems. Basically, two new fighter jet programs. One is a combo of primarily a French and German plane, and then you have a Italian and British plane, primarily a sort of British plane. And this is the Tempest we're talking about. And now it's broken apart again, right? So you have different factions. You have the French that want to do one thing. You have the British that want to do another. And you have the Italians, of course, that wish that everyone could just get along. Let me see if I can find this. This is actually pretty funny. It's always the way it goes. Also, I can, wait a sec, boom. Yeah. Get rid of this too. Oh man, the great thing about live streams is that I can go really deep into a lot of these topics. I have the time, I don't have constraints, and we can just dive really deep into all of this, which makes it so much easier to pull it all in and get a real sense of where things are actually heading. Let's see, and I actually can't find it. I might have lost it. Doesn't matter. Point being, then you have companies or countries like Italy that are trying to get everybody to just get along. Why can't we just have one program? Let's just have a European program. This has been the whole idea since the 90s. Let's bring all of Europe together and have all this stuff that would just be all for all of us, and we'll compete with America. We'll be a United States of Europe, and clearly that has failed, but there's still no other great option. So you have two big industrial programs going on in Europe. Meanwhile, the major company that's building the British program is actually slyly becoming an American company on the side, but it can't tell that to the British. So check this out. This is, here, I'll pull this out for you. Let's see. Boom. So here is the website for BAE. Actually, another thing that's really worth seeing. Can I pull this open? Yeah. So Tempest program. Let's see. Here it is. So this is the Royal Air Force's Tempest page. I feel like everybody should just see this because this actually looks a little better here. But you really look at this website and it kind of looks like a 1990s like corporate PowerPoint project. It just doesn't have any of the gravitas. It has such a weird color scheme. Oh, really low quality images. Oh, well, I do like that one. And it is trying to sell this project to everybody. But even the investment in this website does not look like something that's really going to make it. And it's funny, so here you can go into all this stuff and see all the different pieces they're talking about. All of this is notional. There's been... this is the sort of plane that's probably going to get built in the 2040s, if ever. And to be honest, just to be clear, I don't think this plane's ever going to get built. I actually don't think that the French-German plane's also going to get built. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. This is about the decline of industry in general. So in Britain, you have BAE Systems, right? And this is the big company. It's a global company, but it's also the last remaining British industrial manufacturer. So it has a very difficult PR challenge, right? To manage its image around the world and within Britain is very difficult. So let me pull up quickly okay, good. Let me pull this up now. So a quick thing to see would be this. Here, by the way, I actually found this. This is the Italians trying to say that they want all these combat systems to merge because we can't afford it otherwise, but actually doing so is more easily said than done. This is from the publication known as the War Zone Online. Great military publication. Everybody should check it out. It has really great content. You can really learn a lot doing that. And this is what I really want to talk about, though. So this is a little clip from a British. This is from the British Aerospace BAE website, and they're just talking about, there's a PR bit talking about the great value that BAE provides to the UK. So you can see here all the suppliers. This is actually familiar to anyone who knows anything about American industrial military policy stuff. It looks a lot like this. You have a big map of where you provide all your jobs and all your economic impact. You talk about the contribution to GDP and exports and taxes and upskilling and R&D, etc., right? So you have all of this. This is how BAE speaks to the British people. This is what they want to show the government. They want to make sure that everyone knows that they are the last remaining British manufacturer. And that's definitely true. But the future that BAE is looking to, realistically, it's looking at something very different. It's looking at integrating and competing with the American security, the major defense primes. That is really its future, trying to figure out that. But it has to position itself to appeal to the British government, and to go over why it is so important to Britain. And it is true, without BAE, you're looking at the total collapse of what remains of the industrial supply chain in Britain. It's 100% true. But what exactly can you do? The truth that BAE can't really say out loud, but you see in its corporate planning and in its actual corporate profits and its customers, it's that the British are totally dependent on the United States for all of its security systems and security policy. And this is basically by design and by default. There is no world where the British can kind of do things on their own, right? So their aircraft carriers can't actually do power projection operations without a American escort. They actually lack the destroyers. They lack this sort of carrier group that could make them, that would justify actually sending them into dangerous places where they could be targeted, right? They're too valuable at their assets. They're just way too valuable to throw out there with no protection. So the British actually need American protection to join in on any major expeditionary operations. That's one thing that's a big change. It used to be the country that could take over the world, like I said. They used to be able to go all around the world and, crack it into this, right? Just make this, go all over the world, sail wherever you want, impose your will on every coastal group that you could find. But that is not the way it is anymore. Instead, you have to totally follow what the US does. And this is really difficult. A place like Britain is always going to be caught in between two worlds. So let me bring this back here to this map. And just so people know, this channel, the reason it is about history and it's about development and it's about economics, it's all rooted in geography, and it's all rooted in the one constant we've had, for as long as humans have been around. It has been the planet itself, right? It has been the world map, and yes, it changes due to climate and major events and all sorts of things, but this is still the ground we've all had to deal with. And what England and Britain have to deal with is being an island off the coast of continental Europe, but not a part of it, and the tensions that come from this. You don't want anybody to fully take over continental Europe. You also can't really do it yourself. You don't really have the power to develop land forces that are as large as someone like Germany or Russia, but you do have a great capacity to develop a navy, and you're always in conflict with France. There's a whole story that I'm going to talk about in later videos and courses about what the patterns of European history look like, why they look like the way they do. But what really matters now is that these patterns are still at work, and they're actually re-emerging as this whole global system breaks down. All of these little conflicts in Europe are reappearing. And the fact that France and Germany are trying to make a plane together, that ain't something that's going to last, but it does show that this is, again, a continental effort, and Britain, which is an island country, makes sense that it's trying to get with more of a peninsular country. This is the sort of stuff that makes a lot of sense. The big difference between the United Kingdom and everyone else in Europe, though, is this connection to the mega country of the United States, which is in its own league and is bigger by itself than, more important than all of Europe combined. And I don't mean that in the sense of being presumptuous or, what's that word? Braggadocious. It's just one of those things we have to acknowledge to really get a sense of why the world looks the way it does. But Britain has the capacity and the cultural and the ethnic and the linguistic and even the financial and economic capacity to link in with the United States in a way that nobody else in Europe, except for places like Denmark or the Netherlands and a couple entrepots and commercial zones, have, but still not to the same extent, not with the same depth. That is something that's really important, and that's something that the British have as an option that really most of the world doesn't. So it's also this really punishing experience, though, because you used to be the core, the great nation, and you were totally swept away after 1945, and then your industry was really decimated in the last few decades. So not only is manufacturing as a share of GDP something that's been bad, but check this out. This is the UK trade balance. Everybody knows trade balance. Everybody's always talking about trade balance in the United States. We despise how America has huge deficits, even though that was part of the plan, believe it or not. And this is the UK trade balance, which was not part of the plan. And it just shows how a few services, particularly financial services, professional services, stuff like that, e-commerce and some tech services, all that is up, but not enough to make up for the total collapse in goods. So you have this net trade balance, which is really bad. And there's also more to it. The great, yeah, this is even better. Here we go. So this is maybe the best and most sobering statistic in terms of trade. So this is the annual trade balance in goods since 1870. This puts it in the perspective of that grand moment in Europe, in British industrial history. This is Britain, just even before Germany had really come together, or the United States was just coming out of Reconstruction. This was it when there was really a peak and an absolute total collapse that was really only started in the era of globalization. It was able to functionally keep itself together because it had an imperial system, and then it was part of an American system that allowed it to carve out its niche. And then as these trade policies expanded, and the U.S. was expanding its alliance system, expanding its trade networks, it was really putting huge pressure on all of the industrial systems in the classically advanced countries, in the old industrialized countries of the world. They had to compete with new processes, new services, new countries, new entrants to the labor market, and then absolute dynamos like obviously the United States, but also Germany and Japan, later China, South Korea, all these countries that really do industry in a very different way than the British did. The British have a certain character, right? There's not the same efficiency. There's not that same desperate push for epic output and craftsmanship, and all that really wasn't part of the British industrial story in the same way. There was just a bit of it with the craftsman work, but it was really something different. There's this gentlemanly, a bit of a aristocratic element to the British culture that is very different. That it comes from its history, its wealth, its a lot of parts of its history, and they didn't always mesh well with the industrial world, and they definitely don't mesh that well with the deindustrialized world, where there's a lot of conflict and difficulty in just maintaining the world and the system that you had. So it's very, very, very challenging. And what it actually means, and what all this means, what BAE becoming American, and BAE actually trying to make a plan. One of these key things I'm trying to get across is that this Tempest project is a BAE project, because BAE is all that remains of British industry. And I hate to say it, but the truth is BAE doesn't have the capacity to actually build this plane all by itself. Lockheed Martin, which is the largest defense contractor in the world, bar none, struggled mightily to build the F-35, which is supposedly a fifth-generation fighter compared to this supposed sixth-generation fighter. And it took decades. It was a massive problem. It had so many complications, and it has a massive order base. It has more money to spend. It has a larger talent pool. It has more of everything, more than BAE can hope to ever have. And it can, and it really struggled. So the idea that this one company can do it, it's unfortunately to say, it's just a farce. This isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen, definitely not going to happen in the way that a lot of people are pretending it will. And we already know this, so we can see this in some of the stuff that's already coming out. So check this out. You're hearing a lot about how the British are trying to work with basically anybody on this plane, right? So what's actually happening is Britain, so here's a Reuters headline, Britain to work with Japan on new fighter jet program. Right. So that is the story, supposedly. But part of what's really happening is that Japan also would massively struggle to actually mass produce a new fighter jet. It probably couldn't do it on its own. France is really struggling, so it's trying to get with other countries. Germany, Italy, it's all the same story. The key thing here is that the only country that could really do it is the United States. And also, by the way, there is a program, not the F-35, but the B-21 strategic bomber, which I don't need to pull up a plane. Everybody can go find that itself. But the B-21 is a bomber program, entirely American, being produced and developed right now. And it's going to come out in the next couple of years. It's a strategic bomber, which is a type of aircraft only possessed by 3 countries, and it enables intercontinental strikes. So just bringing it back here, give people a sense of the scale. So I was talking about expeditionary power all around the world, and the only countries that can really do that, You have the United States, continental power, fought 2 wars in 1945, managed to win a war in Europe while also fighting and winning a war on the other side of Eurasia. So basically fought in wars on both sides of Eurasia. That's never happened before. That's actually a completely ridiculous statistic once you really think about it. It can produce all of these planes on itself, and these strategic bombers are meant to actually do those missions where you bomb someone in Europe, or you bomb someone in the Middle East, or South America, or I guess Australia, not really likely, or of course Asia, China, Japan, or of course Russia. So the US, its very distance from the rest of the world implies the need for bomber aircraft that go much farther. They go thousands of miles. There's been no capacity to do that in France or Britain for a very long time, and there isn't going to be one at all. And that capacity to even build these aircraft, and to build over 100, likely 200 or more, is entirely American. There isn't another country that can actually do it. And what we're seeing with the whole program, the F-35 and all these competing supposed future fighter jet programs, is that not really anybody can actually produce fighter jets anymore. And again, it's really important to talk about these fighter jets because they are one of these peak aircraft, one of these peak products of the industrial system. So 3,000 years ago in ancient China, the high bar mark for an industrial product was a chariot. And production of chariots was the grand thing that people were doing. It was a sign of how advanced and impressive you were as a country, or as a minor proto-state. That's cool. That's nothing compared to one of these in a fighter jet, bombers, aircraft carriers, stuff like that. Even though they're military aircraft or military equipment, they're some of the major products of the industrial world. And we're going to talk about, as this week goes on, a lot more products, a lot of different ones that go into energy, they go into chemicals, they go into construction, they go into everything, right? Industries everywhere produces all this stuff. But you got to remember that if you're a nation state, and like I said, if you're a nation state, something like Britain, which has all of these challenges with these component parts of the country, you actually need a military. Militaries are extremely important for maintaining your political integrity, maintaining your national identity, or even your national integrity. It's incredibly important. Places like France have always known that, and they don't give it up. But ironically, in the United States, there's a strong component on the left and the right that really see huge problems with the U.S. military, with militaries in general, and part of that stems from both the size of the U.S. military and, of course, the comparison of the size of the U.S. military to its apparent threats, where bombing people in the Middle East seems a bit egregious, right, with $100 million planes when they barely have running water. So there's a real problem there. But the key thing here, again, is just that industry matters, and industrial products, particularly military equipment, are some of the most important industrial products there are. If you're an industrialized nation, you need to fight industrial wars. And if you can't fight industrial wars and win, you don't get to be an industrial nation. You get to be someone else's colony or a broken country. So we're seeing some of that in Russia. We're seeing that with China. And the reason I'm talking again about the military equipment is because wars are happening. This isn't fantasy anymore. The equipment you have, these are real wars going on. The quality of your equipment, its capacity, how it relates to your national objectives, all of this is super important for who's going to survive in the next couple decades. So if you're an investor or you're just someone curious about the world, we got to know who's actually going to make it. A lot of countries, forget the companies that are going to make it or the industries, a lot of countries aren't going to make it. Their stock markets will go to zero. Their bonds will be worth nothing, right? If you had assets in Russia, they're gone. If you have assets in China, they may be gone pretty soon. This is a completely different world. And this is why on this channel you'll see so much about war and defense and military activity. It is just something that is everywhere. It is something that is throughout history. If we want to have an understanding of the great patterns of history, where they're taking us and where we're going, we've got to know what this stuff is. So one of the great patterns of history is this total crazy dominance of North America and the United States in particular, of the world. Right, that is one of the things that's happened. And one way that you can see this is in this F-35 program. So here we are talking about the Tempest and future combat air systems and Japanese fighter jets, and there's also a South Korean fighter jet, and obviously there's two, in particular, advanced Chinese fighter aircraft and a supposed Chinese bomber that's going to be advanced as well, strategic bomber. These are the main aircraft in production that are the keystone of Air Force strategy, doctrine, and future equipment. It's a major set of products, and it's really important, and one of the most important ones is the F-35. So everybody who's been alive for the last 15 years, 20 years, has heard a lot about this program, and it's been a joke and a problem and everything for a really long time. But the thing that it is now is a success, and it's important to talk about why. So let's look at this aircraft really quick. First thing to see is, let's pull this up. This is a map of, let me see if I can get the key. Let me send this back here. Boom. Okay, so here we go. Here we have, so this is a map of all the orders the F-35 has gotten around the world. It has 13, 14-ish countries that have bought the aircraft, been accepted in the program. La-di-da. All of these colors are just about deliveries and when they arrive, and if they've arrived, if they've been used, etc. It's not very important. The only one that matters is red. Turkey was booted from the F-35 program, and that is why it is red, because it is not going to get this aircraft. It's going to get something else. But this map really matters, because this is one of the keystones of U.S. policy throughout the Cold War and afterwards. This is a map of how the U.S. was binding all of these countries around the world into its security system and its security architecture and its security and weapons systems. This is a map of how the U.S. subordinated a lot of countries around the world. It's really a profound one. And what you actually see today is that most countries, like I've been saying, they lack the ability to even make their own aircraft anymore. They totally lack the indigenous skills to do it. There's a lot of countries right now that are trying. Some notable ones are South Korea and Turkey, Japan as well, but Japan already knows it doesn't have the labor force and the domestic industrial factory tool set to actually do this anymore. Things have really changed there, so it needs a partner, and everyone's just basically trying to find out who to partner with. And the problem is, you really can't partner with anyone other than the United States. So if you look at this, this is a map of the F-35. This is a picture of the F-35. It's all the different components of the aircraft are broken out, and it shows where they come from, right? So one of the major criticisms of the F-35 is that both domestically and internationally, it has its production spread everywhere. Everybody gets a piece of the game, right? And so this is deliberate. You have here American companies, Turkish companies, although they got booted, so this is an older image. Further American companies, Italian companies, BAE, notice a lot of the aft structures, they're done by BAE. You have Canadian, you have Kongsberg, Norwegian, you have, again, Australian, Denmark, Israeli companies. Everyone is getting in on this program. So everyone has an incentive to stay with the program, to deepen their involvement, to buy the systems, and to integrate themselves in with the American security system. And the big problem with this, of course, is that it has real consequences these days. It was all nice when the world was hunky-dory. The U.S. let you do whatever you want, or at least was on your side, would give you goodies if you couldn't do the thing that you wanted. But look what happened to Turkey. Turkey got booted out of the program, and now it's not going to succeed at building a better plane, so it has to try and get the F-16. That's kind of the only major option that it has, and it's not a good one if you're fighting against people that have this aircraft. But that is not the way it is. And just another quick thing here. This is just a sense of the value breakdown of an aircraft. You can see that the engines, these are the, excuse me, so this is the F-35B. This is the vertical takeoff aircraft, which is particularly useful for a lot of countries, but mainly these maritime powers like Japan and the British, the United Kingdom, where they want to put these on aircraft carriers to have them be part of an expeditionary force. It's really important. And you can just see all the breakdown of the different technologies, engines being really important. It's a very good image by Bloomberg, worth checking out. So this is, let me see this one also. So, right. And as things happen, so everyone is talking about building other fighter jets and doing this and that and da-da-da. But you got to remember that the F-35 is not just an internationally spread out program where everybody's getting a piece of the pie. It's the exact same thing in the United States. You can say what you want about the military-industrial complex, is that they know how to get senators and representatives on board. That is really something they excel at. And this is what you get. You get a system where you're going to have to fight a real uphill battle to try and extract, get new planes, or somehow in any way compromise this massive program, right? This is the largest military program in Pentagon history, is the F-35. So any country that's trying to undermine it or create competitors to it, you're going to get a lot of pushback. It's going to be super difficult to get that done. And I'll just give you one more thing on the F-35. It's actually really worth it. This is this picture in the United States. Look at all this. This is Lockheed, or whichever particular defense company is doing it. This is their same PR telling Americans and American representatives, political representatives, how important the F-35 is. Look, it shows all the states, just like you saw in Britain. And of course, you also have the same map internationally. And this is that same thing we're talking about, where you can see the huge impact in France, Turkey, Australia, everywhere, right? Very important, very, very important. This is part of the reason there's been such a problem with the program, also part of the reason it is so sticky. So this is where we are, right? You have this amazingly large and also successful F-35 program, and that's what I was getting back to. This is a successful program, and you'd asked me 15 years ago, I'd have laughed in your face. There's been so many problems. I could go through all the problems with this program that still are ongoing. There's a million of them. There's so many problems, from the engines to the integration to the servicing to everything, to the electronic and automated updates and digital systems. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems. But the aircraft is here, and the United States is producing 150, 175 of them a year. This is mass production. So in a few years, there's going to be 500, 600 more of them. There is no other major advanced modern aircraft reaching those numbers. And there's not a single country, barring China, that's going to get anywhere near that. Russia can't produce this stuff anymore. Nobody in Europe can. Japan can. And most of the countries that could produce it, or years ago could have produced it, are all on board with this system. So this is what we have. We have this world where everyone is part of the U.S. security infrastructure. And a big reason why the U.S. has this massive security budget, this military budget, everyone's always so angry about, is because the U.S. is paying for the defense of many other countries. It's paying to not have these other countries have their own militaries and then get into wars and then do many different things that could threaten U.S. interests. That's part of the idea behind this grand strategy. So when you look at the defense budget, if you see this map, this chart, let me see if I can even find one for everybody. You'll always see this chart, defense spending, top 10. It's always the same thing. It's always, the United States is just so much larger than anyone else in the world, but there's something hidden there that, boom, ooh, this is a good one. That's also good. We'll put up both of them for you guys. Let's see. We'll do the F-35. That works. There, we got one. We got two. Actually, that looks like the wrong one. Here it is. So difficult, huh? Okay, so here's this one. Let's make all these disappear, huh? Where'd it go, huh? Boom, 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 boom. And nope, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. Ah, that works. Let's see how good it is. It's amazing when you just don't. You want so much better quality. Oh, but it's just a small one. All right, let's do this. Open image, new tab. Pop this open. Pull this over. Let's try that. How'd that work? That's pretty good. All right, we'll do that. Oops. Oops. Oh, jeez. Okay, let's figure this out. There it is. There it is. Get tired here. Boom. No, that's not boom. There it is. Okay, here we go. This is fine. This is a classic thing you see. Here's the U.S. Crazy, crazy defense budget. Look at that. So much larger than everybody else. Anybody who's been alive the last 50 years has seen some version of this chart. And you have all these countries are like, what is going on? Why is the United States spending so much money compared to everybody else? Well, the reason the U.S. spends all this is because it is imposing a security policy and security systems on all of these countries. Let's leave aside China for a second. Also, those numbers are dubious for China, but United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, all these countries buy most of their equipment from the United States. They are creating their policies in knowing that they're part of a U.S. security alliance system. A country like Germany that doesn't have this U.S. security umbrella and overwatch and integration is going to have a massive military that's going to be trying to protect itself from all the other countries around it. Japan, if it doesn't have this U.S. integration, is going to be trying to secure resources to make sure it doesn't starve or run out of energy. And this is the story of World War II. So this is the story. In a country like China, if it didn't have the U.S. preventing it from doing certain things, would probably be doing all sorts of things, like invading Taiwan a long time ago, right? And it goes on and on. The same thing with Russia. If there wasn't a counterbalance of NATO troops in Eastern Europe, it would be very difficult to see a world where Russia didn't just do what it wanted and what it saw as its neighborhood. So this is part of the story. This is part of what we have to understand, that when you see these giant numbers, if you ever see those numbers start to shift, it's a sign that the world's going to get a lot more violent, because old imperial powers like Germany, like Japan, might start doing the things that they used to do, which is what they use their military for. So that is also what we're seeing when Germany starts expanding its military budget again, increasing it because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's both a good thing because they're sharing, shouldering their part of the burden and the weight of NATO and all of that. That's fine. But it's also a sign that Germany's regaining its national capacity to do what it wants in Europe more than it has had that capability. You gotta think about it. It's a bit of a different story. But what you see all around the world, when you have those tiny defense budgets, you see this total loss of industry, of a self-defense industry, of a defense industry, and really the ability of these countries, if the shit hit the fan, excuse my language, for them to even survive. And you have a whole air force, which is the key to securing the modern battle space. They're all dependent on basically imported American systems, and the F-35 is much more of a permanently plugged in aircraft where you're really integrated in with a lot of, you need updates, you need connections to all sorts of electronic databases and a lot of US software and infrastructure for the planes to function. It's a big problem with the Israelis and the Americans. It was over that very question. So here we are with Britain unable to actually produce this aircraft that is supposed to be its future, which is being made by the last remaining industrial company in the initial industrial nation, right? In the first nation, the first human state, human group to industrialize and give us this massive explosion of improvement and advancement that we've seen in the last few hundred years. So this is Britain, the place that birthed the Industrial Revolution, really deindustrializing at a really crazy rate. So that chart I showed you earlier, this one, manufacturing share GDP in Britain. I mean, this is an old, this is kind of old. It doesn't even go far enough back. If you go back to the 1970s, that top number, I guess you can't see it, the top number 17, it goes back to like 25, right? So there's been a decline, massive decline in industry in Britain, and it's not the sort of place where it's ever coming back. It's really not. It's a real story of London versus the rest. And Brexit had many problems and many failings, but the narrative that was used to galvanize the vote to leave the European Union really was touching on, clearly, valid currents in British society. And a lot of these currents come from this. So that is, that is the way things are. Right, and let's see where we're going here. Yeah, I guess, as we start moving into the end of this live stream, this broadcast here, it's important to remember that BAE is joining the American fold in a lot of ways. So it's pitching this giant aircraft. But as you saw in this picture, the aft of the airframe, and I believe some electronic weapon systems, although they could be recompeted, I'm not actually sure. I haven't thought about that in a while. I looked it up. The whole back of the aircraft is a BAE supplied component. And BAE actually has something like 15% of the airframe value on the F-35. So it's going to win either way. It's not going to win as much as it made its own plane or whatever, but it's still going to win. It's still going to be able to compete. And that is really not the case for a lot of other countries and for most of the British industrial sector. They're not going to be able to decamp to the United States. This is actually something that's happening in the Israeli industrial complex as well, the military industrial complex, where they're actually having to create even more lasting and deep relations with the American system. There's just no other way for them to sustain their industrial sector once the subsidies that the U.S. has been giving them start to decline. So what's really happening is BAE is pandering to the British, and it's doing this PR campaign, and it's trying to galvanize European interests, and talking to the Spanish and talking to the Italians and doing all that, but it's going to build this plane. And Dassault in France, major manufacturer, they also have their own plan, and they're trying to get other people on board. And so does Sweden. The only two countries that probably have the indigenous capacity to really build their own planes is France and Sweden. Everybody else is going to do something else. What they're probably going to do is just get the F-35. It is cheap and available. That's what I was talking about earlier. The price of the F-35 has gone down a lot. It is now so expensive. If you want to think about actually building a new jet, when the price of the F-35 has finally come down, you're talking about a crazy, crazy prospect. This is never going to be competitive. You have to prove that your new plane is going to be better and more economical. And you have to be willing to fund this investment all the way into the 2040s, when Russia is invading countries now. So this is why the F-35 has actually won every single competition that it's been in. Again, it has a million problems, but there's no other option. As long as other people are buying the F-35, as long as you know that the United States is going to keep buying it, and that you're somewhat integrated in with its systems, is a huge, huge win. It's hard to overcome this value proposition. So the Czech Republic recently just bought 24. Poland, Norway, it's Finland, it's every country. It's really every country. So it's not going to happen. None of these other planes are going to happen. And a lot of countries are just going to have to accept that they're going to have to use the U.S. as their partner. That's the way it's going. And this is only the start of deindustrialization. It has really barely begun. Britain is extremely lucky to have BAE for all of its problems and for all of its integrations with the United States. And it's lucky to be close to the United States. It's lucky to be that country that has those connections. Like the rest of the Anglosphere, they can actually integrate in with the friends and family group of the United States. Most countries aren't that lucky. So we're coming to the end of this broadcast, and it's good to talk about what this means and where it's bringing us. So the era of weak American industry is really coming to an end. That narrative is about to die. It's not going to make any sense. American industry is actually a really great place for financial and operational investment. So I mean, for corporations that want to expand and develop products, but also for investors that are looking to move into different industries, right? It really depends on what you're looking for, the sort of exposure, the sort of risk, the sort of return. But the transformation that we're seeing in the world means that a lot of our investment patterns are really shifting. I'll get to that in a second, but you got to remember that America is this big dog. We saw it on the map just when we were looking really closely at Britain, just how small it was and all these little complications in Europe nearby, and you have to expand the map out just to even look at the United States. So as the United States is expanding its industry and really improving, you're going to see the rest of the world really struggle. And defense is a great place to see it because the U.S. has actually actively corroded a lot of the indigenous capabilities of these countries. You had to actively try to maintain your indigenous capacity like France did, like Japan did to a certain extent, and like other countries like Sweden do. You had to actually do this to maintain the capacity to deal with and develop in the systems you need as the world starts to break down. So that's what's going on. And any of these countries, what they're doing now, the reason Japan is trying to work with the United Kingdom, even though they're on the other side of the world, is because everyone's grasping around for who they can integrate with to make up for what they lack. But the big thing they're going to realize is the only one you can integrate with is the United States. So that's part of the reason you saw the breakup of, it was France and Australia over a sub-program, where it just, the Australians basically realized, why on earth would we do this with the French? We can do it with the Americans when there's so many benefits, when it could cause problems if we don't. And this is the thing you're going to see everywhere. You're going to see the UK trying to get in on this. Everyone is trying to move around and position themselves to better take advantage of the opportunities we see in this moment. But truth, the absolute truth, is that everyone is just trying to fight the ultimate conclusion that they're going to have to partner with the United States, or they're going to have real problems, right? Like, let's say you are Australia and there's a major conflict with China. What do you do when you need to get parts all the way from France? Right? It's very difficult. The United States is well positioned to be able to help a country like the United Kingdom, which is another island, or Japan, or Australia, or really anyone in a lot of ways. That's why it is the partner of choice of almost everyone. So that is our intro into Industry Week. That's our intro into where things are going, and defense, security, war, the military. This is something we're all going to have to think about again. It's not just the market caps and the different ratios and the price to earnings. This isn't going to tell you the full picture anymore. A lot of it is the skill sets that are involved, the actual capacities, the output numbers they can actually use. All this is really going to matter. And there's a lot of thought about what to invest in now and all that. And there's interest in the defense sector. But that's not really what this one was about. I actually think that industrial investment is a lot more difficult and complex than people realize, and it's really changing. It's becoming more nuanced, like the rest of investment in general. We're entering this period of immense volatility, immense volatility, as the breakdown of all the correlations and all of the linkages that have made everything that we know possible. We're going to enter a very new world where all of our decisions and our investment decisions, our personal decisions, our business decisions are going to have to be much more company specific and inflected with a knowledge of geopolitics. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely difficult to make the right call. So whole industries are being shaken up right now, and to just use what we used to know and thought we know about how things work, it's going to be super difficult. So the other thing is just to invest in index funds, right? I think that's the other thing to do, and I think it's a great policy for most people, trying to just build some wealth. But if you're trying to understand what's going on and make active investment decisions, it's a very different world, right? It's a different style of investing. And obviously, I know I'm very familiar with the outcomes with passive investing, but we also have to think about the entire financial system, the entire resource allocation across the country. A country like Japan is actually roughly 80% passive index type allocation in equities, and not actually, at least in equities, but in its financial system in general. It's a very different world. That's a sort of world where it's quite unclear what it actually means to be an investor. So, yeah, maybe after Industry Week we'll do a finance week. We'll talk about hyperfinance. We'll start unwinding a bit of the misconceptions people have about finance. It's definitely not voodoo. Anyone who's listening to this program can definitely understand it. Definitely make a strong showing when they're trying to talk about these subjects. So that's definitely an interesting thing, but we're going to be sticking to Industry Week, and soon we're going to be talking about the coming breakdown of EU industry. That's what this is leading into. So just like you had those problems with integration within the United Kingdom, on a political level, you have a similar problem with the integration of industry in Europe. It used to cause a lot of wars over coal, over steel, over all sorts of minerals, whether it's iron. These are old stories, and unfortunately the history of conflict and attempted integration and all that is coming back. It's an old story, just like the story of Britain, which probably in a Patreon exclusive I'll do a real deep dive into the story of Britain, which is a really glorious one, or even the glory of London, which is another really amazing story. But that's it for now. This is the start of Industry Week. This is the start of a real new conversation about where things are going in the world, how we can learn to build our knowledge of the world from the ground up to inform our investment decisions, to inform our personal decisions, our business decisions. This is really important. So definitely like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Subscribe. There's going to be a lot of really great content coming out. You don't want to miss it. There's going to be specials coming out on Nancy Pelosi doing her thing, Taiwan, Chinese overseas debt. There's really a lot to talk about and a lot to learn, a lot to do as we build this community of people who are actually trying to understand things at a deeper level. So if you don't already follow me on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. There's a lot of shorts going on there too. So the posting schedule for the show is definitely up in the air a bit. The studio, as you can see behind me, is in process. Actually moving things around pretty soon. So that'll be pretty cool. But it's looking like Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays are going to be the days. We'll actually see, but it's going to be good. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think that's mostly it. Definitely send me any comments, any messages if you want to collaborate, work, if you need consulting, help on whatever you're trying to do with your business, your personal life, or your investment decisions. I am not a financial advisor, but I do consult on these matters and have done so for years now. So let's definitely work together if there's something we can do. And with that, I'm out. I'll catch you guys next time.